Okay, so our presenter today is Dr. Yvette Martinez-Vu. Dr. Yvette is a first-generation chronically ill neurodivergent Chicana grad school and productivity coach, consultant, author, and speaker. She is the producer and host of the top global ranked podcast, Grad School Femtoring, and the founder of Grad School Femtoring LLC, where she supports first-generation BIPOCs as they navigate higher education. Dr. Yvette is the co-author of the book, Is Grad School for Me? Demystifying the Application Process for First-Generation BIPOC Students with the University of California Press. And she is also the co-editor of the best-selling Chicana Motherwork Anthology with the University of Arizona Press. Dr. Yvette, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Sam, for having me here today. Thank you also to Danielle for being here, supporting, and to everybody else at the Professional Development and Engagement Office. I just want to shout you out. Can we give them a round of applause emojis to them for all the hard work that they do to put on these types of events? Would love to see some emojis. Thank you. Yes, I see a few. So I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is how to thrive in community and learning about sustainable productivity, in particular with the lens of being first gen or BIPOC or both. So let's get started. So I've got a few learning objectives for you. I want to make sure that at the end of today's workshop, you feel like you have a foundation of what sustainable productivity is, and you feel like you have a clear definition of self-care and community care. I also want you to start to understand some concepts that could be helpful to you in helping you redefine dominant narratives around productivity and care. These dominant narratives that can sometimes be hurtful to us if we internalize them. So I'll talk more about that as we keep going. And I also want you to gain concrete time management, project management, self care, and community care strategies, because I really want you to actually have things that you can apply right after we're done with the workshop. I want you to feel galvanized at the end of the workshop to take action on the ideas and the strategies that you learned today. And just as a reminder, I know that Sam already mentioned that there are different ways to participate here today, but I also want to let you know that I believe in co-creating an interactive, affirming space where all of your experiences are valid, no matter your identity markers. And I also want to let you know that I may ask questions here or there, and you have different ways to participate. You can use emojis, you can share in the chat, you can even message me privately, or actually, you could also message perhaps Sam privately. I see the wave. And either Sam or myself will read it anonymously. So that way, if you have a question that maybe you don't want to share to the public, but you want to get addressed, we can still address it. And then lastly, again, cameras are encouraged, but not required. So let me tell you a little bit more about me, because I do think it's important for you to have context on who I am, what I do, why I do what I do. So I am a first-gen child of immigrants. I'm a child of Mexican immigrants. I was born and raised in Southern California. I later became raised by a single mother after my dad suddenly passed away of a brain aneurysm when I was 12. At that point, my mom had 6 kids, and as the eldest daughter, I took on a lot of responsibilities. And in many ways, because of our circumstances, I was parentified. And in light of this, I actually had different sanctuaries or different spaces where I felt like I could be seen and heard. And those two spaces for me were education and theater. I ended up becoming the first in my family to go to college and graduate, also the first in my family to move out of the home. I actually did theater for many years. I started doing theater in 4th grade because back then, people didn't know what my voice sounded like. I was selectively mute. I hardly talked out loud. And my dad forced me to audition for the 4th grade play because he wanted me to break out of my shell. And lo and behold, to my surprise and horror, I landed the lead role. And then afterward, I figured out that actually theater was a space where I could be my full self, my extra self, my dramatic self, my sensitive self, my emotional self. And that's why it was such a pivotal thing for me to continue doing theater. So by the time I got to college, I kept doing theater. I decided to major in English literature because I didn't know about a lot of my options back then. So I was an English major, I was a theater minor, and I kept receiving messages that theater practice wasn't a realistic career. And at that point, I was in college, I was an undergrad at UCLA. I heard about this program called the McNair program. And I found out, oh, wait, I can study what I want for a living and figure out, find a way to make ends meet that way. That sounds great. So I decided I'm not going to become a theater practitioner. I'm going to become a theater professor instead. And I applied for that program. I did not get in. And later I applied to another program called the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship. And I did get in, and I was part of the first cohort at UCLA. These folks you see here, they're my Mellon sisters from the first cohort several years ago. I won't say what year. And that secured me the support that I needed to apply and get into graduate programs. And I ended up continuing at UCLA for a PhD, not in English, but in theater and performance studies. And it was at that point that I feel like a lot of things happened in graduate school for me that changed the trajectory of my life. There are three pivotal moments for me in particular. The first was that as early as my first year in grad school, I started working as a mentor and I loved it. I realized service work was for me. The second thing was that I worked really, really hard, but I also didn't give myself a break. I overworked myself to the point of burnout, to the point of developing my first of what would later become many chronic illnesses. And that was a big reality check for me that I needed to slow down and I needed to do things differently from the way I saw others doing it around me. So that was the second thing that was impactful for me. The third thing is, of course, this picture you see here of me with this young child. That's my first child who I had in graduate school. And becoming a mom really changed me and transformed me. It was the single most difficult thing that I've ever experienced in my life. And also the most empowering thing for me to go through, especially up to that point. With becoming a mom, I also struggled with my mental health. I didn't know I was neurodivergent at the time. I struggled with postpartum depression and anxiety. And thankfully, I had access to support services to help me to get better. And that's why I'm a big proponent of mental health. If you have access to it, please take advantage of these resources. So by the time I finished grad school, all these things had happened, and all of them in the back of my head, I had this feeling, I don't think I want to become a professor anymore. And I listened to that gut feeling. And after I got my PhD, I decided to apply to jobs in higher ed, primarily service oriented jobs. That's when I started working at a scholarship center. And then later I started working for a McNair program where I actually directed a McNair program for nearly 5 years. And it was during COVID that I decided to take a big leap to pursue entrepreneurship. I also moved my family abroad. That's a whole other story. I am now back from having lived abroad, and I continue to do what I do today, which is support first gen BIPOC students through this higher ed and post higher ed journey. Give me a sec. All right, I want to hear from you. I want to hear energy levels. How are y'all feeling right now? 1 to 10. It's just so that I can get a read of the room. Since I can't see all of you, especially in my small screen, I want to hear from you in the chat if you're comfortable sharing. What is your energy level right now? 1, low energy, 10, high energy, or somewhere in the middle. And also, if you want to, share the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you think about productivity. All right, I'm taking a look. I see sevens, 3, 4. Okay. 7. Oh, someone said always working, productivity. Yeah. 1, 3, stress. I hear you. Pressure, strain. I definitely have felt that way. And I hope that after today, you will have a different perspective on productivity. Thank you. This is good to know. So, you all are kind of in the middle in terms of energy levels, which I completely understand. Oh, three, capitalism, colonialism. Yes, yes, for sure. I hear you. Okay, we're definitely going to talk about systemic issues today. And then to publication. I'm going to keep going, but thank you for sharing, everyone. So I'm going to start with a definition of sustainable productivity, what I am referring to by sustainable productivity. So for me, it means learning how to get work done in a way that doesn't compromise and instead enhances well being. I've had to learn this the hard way because of my chronic illnesses. It involves learning and implementing strategies that are effective in the long term, not just short term. So that's what makes it sustainable. And also, it allows for healthy cycling between work and the many other areas of our lives. We have so many facets to us, so many roles and areas. And a lot of times, work takes up so much of it that I do truly believe that we need to tend to other parts of our lives. Now, when I think about sustainable productivity, I can't help but compare it to traditional notions of productivity, which is probably what you've been thinking about when you were thinking about the stress, the pressure, and all the other words that you mentioned, the strain, right? So, sustainable productivity is you figuring out your own holistic and tailored approach to you getting work done and functioning day to day. It does include a long term perspective. Unlike traditional notions of productivity, where it's really compartmentalized, it's generic, it's one size fits all, it's just hustle. Don't worry about the long term, just get it done now. Sustainable productivity is more emphasizing on the holistic well being. It's more inclusive of different areas of your life, and it's critical of systems that are impacting you, impacting your body, your mind, your spirit. Traditional productivity is more focused on blurring the lines between work and personal life, where work often takes over your personal life too. There's a disregard of your well being. And there's also no regard, no critique, no thinking about systemic inequities and how they may be impacting you. Now, I'm also going to talk about care today because I feel like the two things go hand in hand. And I'm not just talking about self care, I'm also talking about community care. I can't talk about one without the other. The other question I could have asked you all was what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about self care or care in general? Because when I've asked this before, the first thing that comes to mind are these very commercialized notions of self care, what you see in the ads, going to a very expensive retreat or going to a spa or who knows what, something that's been highly capitalized on. When I think about, and I don't know what happened here, but when I think about self care, when I think about community care, I am not thinking about these commercialized notions of it. Instead, I'm thinking about it as something that's integral to my survival and that is interconnected with my communities. So it is political, it is deeply tied to social justice. I firmly believe that at the core, I'm getting emotional, at the core of social justice is love, a love of people, a love of community. So it's important that if you believe in social justice, that you also take time to tend to yourself and to your loved ones and to your community because it's part of a broader movement. So really it involves you taking time to prioritize the things that you need that are very particular to you to help you to keep going because you need to keep going to do the work that matters most to you. So, one of the things that I want to mention is that we can't talk about self care and community care conceptually. It sounds easy, but it's a lot harder to do in practice because of systemic barriers that can come up that can impact us. A couple of barriers that I just want to mention out loud today is the barrier of access. Some of us can't access resources because we don't have access to the same amount of time. We might not have access to the same amount of finances or financial resources. Geographically, we might not have access to certain things we need to survive and thrive. And even within access to education, you might not have the same access to information that others around you have. Similarly, cultural expectations might be impacting you. You might be dealing with cultural stigmas. You might be impacted by gender roles. You might be someone who feels like you're constantly having to straddle between cultures. You might have more familial obligations than those around you. And you might also be experiencing what I will expand on later called family achievement guilt, where you feel bad for the achievements that you've had because those before you have not had the same level of access and privileges that you have. Academic pressure can come up for us, especially for those of us that are first gen. You feel like you're constantly having to play catch up. You feel like you're having to learn the hidden curriculum. I remember I would always carry with me a little notepad and write down all these acronyms because I never understood. It sounded like people were speaking another language when I was in higher ed settings, especially in college. But even it continued on in grad school. And then that might mean that it impacts you to the point where you feel like an imposter and you feel like you don't fit in, like you don't belong, like you don't deserve to be there when that is not true. We'll talk about the imposter phenomenon in more detail soon as well. And then, of course, you might have been taught to focus only on doing things for others and focusing on extrinsic goals because that is what you've been told is what defines success. And it might have nothing to do with what you truly want to do. And then I also want to mention lack of representation. You might not have role models that are showing you options for what you can do that sustains your well being. You might be dealing with harmful media coverage, coverage that dehumanizes you, that reminds you that people like you are not prioritized in the systems that we're part of. You also might be seeing commercialized forms of self-care and you think that's not for you, that's not accessible, that's not available to you. Or you might be feeling a lot of negativity and you might be working to the point of one day you're going to be happy because one day you're going to reach this goal, but you're not aware that actually we tend to have a negativity bias. And if you don't start to learn to reframe your thoughts and realize sometimes my thoughts are more negative than positive, and where is the evidence? Is this actually factual, what I'm telling myself that are hurtful messages? And even with the arrival fallacy is realizing that you have to prioritize yourself throughout the process and not wait until you reach a certain milestone to put yourself and your community first. All right, I would love to hear from some of you, if you're comfortable. What systemic barriers have you experienced? Any that I've mentioned or any others that actually I didn't get to share? I see this implicit racism in the workplace. Yeah. Politics inspired by elections, international issues of oppression, genocide. Yes, yes. And the fact that we have to continue going even amidst the dehumanization and literal genocide of people is not okay. And it impacts us. Lack of representation in my field that can also deeply impact you. When you don't see anybody like you and you're not being validated or affirmed, of course, it's going to be hard and challenging. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to keep going just in the interest of time since I lost a few minutes there. All right, so now I'm going to go into expanding more on some of these concepts that I've already mentioned, because the point is to help you gain awareness of these dominant notions of care and productivity and how they're impacting you. And then hopefully with these concepts, you can start to reframe these narratives so that way you can reframe them in a way that's empowering to you, or that's at the very least helpful to you. So the first one, which to me, it feels like everybody and their mama knows this concept, but not everybody and their mama understands where it comes from or even applies it accurately, is this term of intersectionality. Intersectionality was famously coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a prominent civil rights, critical race theory, and legal scholar. In her case, when she was doing the work, she was referring to it in a legal setting about cases of discrimination against women of color that are in relation to them experiencing both forms of racism and sexism. Why am I mentioning it here today? I'm mentioning it here because I want you to understand this idea of how you might have multiple intersectional identities or identities at which you hold oppressed sites or oppressed forms of where you're being oppressed. And I want you to call attention to that. Like, how is it that dominant notions of productivity and care are oppressing you? How is it that they impact your identity? So I'll give you an example. So for me, when I think about intersectionality, I think about my different identities, both as sites of privilege and sites of oppression. When I think about at sites of oppression, I think about myself as a woman of color, although I do have light skin privilege. I think about chronic illness. I think about neurodivergence. And I think about how when I think about dominant notions of productivity and care, it is harder for me to access these resources. And I do have more needs than other people. And so I have to call attention to the fact I hold these sites of oppression and in these ways. I need to support myself. And also, I need to hold myself accountable and use my sites of privilege to support others. Again, always in conversation with care and productivity because we're all interconnected with each other. So it's really a lot of give and take. Another concept I want to mention is the concept of family achievement guilt. And this can come up a lot, especially for first gen scholars. And it's this guilt, discomfort that you might feel for having more educational opportunities than those before you. If you're experiencing family achievement guilt, you might find yourself minimizing your achievements in front of others because you don't want to be read as someone who is bragging or showing off. And, if you are a first gen college student, it can actually negatively impact your well being and your mental health. I say this so that you can call attention to it when you start to notice it, when you start noticing yourself getting smaller, especially around family. And so that you can start to reframe it as, you know what? I shouldn't feel bad. Instead, I should think about how amazing that the people before me worked hard enough to get me to this point, and my successes are also their successes. It is a form of collective success. And I do get to reward myself and celebrate myself because the more that I show up, the more that I'm showing up for those coming in behind me as well. Now, I want to mention cultural straddling. I want to hear maybe some emojis, thumbs up if you are someone who feels like you are straddling multiple cultures while in grad school. I'm trying to see. Okay. Well, in any case, I want to mention this that if you are an immigrant or a child of immigrants in higher ed, you are facing issues of cultural straddling. And actually, if you are first gen, the fact that you are first gen, you're also dealing with cultural straddling, meaning you are balancing two or more cultures that can impact your sense of inclusion and belonging. Cultural straddling, though, as you work to embrace it, it is a skill that you can strengthen over time, and it can allow you to maintain your cultural identity because something that comes up is sometimes we feel so pressured that some folks choose to assimilate. And I'm not a proponent of assimilation. I'm a proponent of you finding ways to show up as yourself and to view what you bring as assets because you do. Your identities and the different cultures that are part of you, they are assets that you bring in. If you don't feel like they are assets, then there's a good likelihood that you haven't been affirmed, you haven't been validated. So keep that in mind as you think about when you're acquiring cultural capital in educational professional settings. You also bring with you your own sense of capital that comes from your family, your communities. Now, let's talk about gender roles. I can't not talk about gender roles, especially as someone who identifies as a woman. I know that gender roles impact multiple people, women, femmes, and folks who don't conform to traditional gender expectations. How does this show up? This will show up as you taking on more emotional labor, taking on more care work, doing more service work, or being called on to do more service work, doing more mentoring, more femtoring, and other forms of often invisible and undervalued labor. And this also means that you might face more judgment as you set boundaries or intentionally choose to resist these standards. So, for me, an example of how this impacts me is as a first gen Latina, I am faced with living up to this concept of Marianismo, which is these idealized notions of femininity that stem from Catholicism and the figure of La Virgen de Guadalupe. So it means that there's this expectation for me within my family and my community to be feminine, submissive, self sacrificing. But guess what? The reframe here is that I get to choose what standards I'm going to maintain and to what extent I will, and which ones I will resist. I get to choose how I set my boundaries. You get to be intentional with it. You get to decide. Yes, I'm going to follow some of them. No, I'm not. I used to really, really struggle with this. I used to struggle with accepting my femininity because I felt like, well, as a feminist, how am I supposed to? Why would I want to be feminine? And then I realized, hold up. There is power in choice. There is power in choosing to wear the lipstick, not because I'm being forced to, but because I want to. And that's what I want to remind you as well, that you have that choice. I also have to talk about the imposter phenomenon, also known as imposter syndrome. It comes up so much. It's such a common topic of conversation in the spaces that I'm part of, which are predominantly spaces with first-gen college students, BIPOC college students, non-traditional college students. What is the imposter phenomenon? So I'm calling it a phenomenon and not a syndrome to call attention away from it being a personal failing and instead it being more of a systemic issue. So it is a phenomenon, and it refers to the experience of feeling like you are a fraud, you're doubting your skills, you don't feel good enough, you don't even acknowledge your own accomplishments, you feel like you're going to get caught, you got into grad school by mistake. And these thoughts, these feelings manifest a lot of times in traits of high achievement and perfectionism. And as you go down that hole, it can lead to burnout. And trust me, right there, I'm a recovering high achiever. I'm a recovering perfectionist. I deeply understand this. And I still legit feel that imposter phenomenon even to this day, even right now. I'm not going to lie. And I say this just to say that as soon as you start to realize that imposter phenomenon is not a personal failing, it's not a shortcoming, and instead it's attributed to systemic barriers. In fact, there are scholars I know of at least one scholar that coined the term imposterization to refer to the ways that the systems around you make you feel like an imposter because they're not providing you with the supports that you need. They're not providing you with the representation you need. They are not affirming you. They are not validating you. And I cannot stress that enough. Every time you feel like you're not good enough, ask yourself, am I surrounded with people that are affirming me? Am I surrounded by people that are validating me? Even if not, how can I enter more of those spaces so that that imposter phenomenon can slowly start to dissipate or at least kind of lower? So that way you can start to take more courageous acts and do the bigger things that you feel called to do. And then I mentioned this earlier in the negativity bias and the arrival fallacy, but I really want to make sure that you understand this well. So with negativity bias, I'm referring to the tendency to pay more attention to negative information, stimuli, and experiences than positive ones. And of course, it impacts your mental health. If you let yourself just go down this negativity spiral, of course it's going to impact you. The arrival fallacy is I I put these two together because they both to me are tied to this idea of a not focusing on joy, not focusing on the positive. And I don't believe in toxic positivity either, but I do believe that you deserve to experience more moments of joy even in grad school. So when I'm talking about the arrival fallacy, talking about this idea, I didn't coin this by the way. This is by someone named Ben Shahar or Tal Ben Shahar, refers to the arrival fallacy as the false notion that once you have arrived, that, yay, finally, I finished my PhD, I'm going to be happy, that you're finally going to experience joy, happiness, etc. But instead, what happens is you get to that big pinnacle of quote unquote success, and you might think to yourself, this is it? Why don't I feel the way that I thought I was going to feel? And that happens when, again, you're not prioritizing joy along the way in the journey, when you're not celebrating yourself, rewarding yourself along the way. So I want, hopefully, to encourage you all to celebrate yourself, even with the smallest milestones that you achieve in grad school. I appreciate the nods, by the way. All right. So, depending on how we are with time, I want to make sure that we have a little bit of a bio break because I know I've been speaking a lot. I want to make sure everybody's okay. If it's okay, Sam, how are we with time? Because I'm at the halfway mark.
We are very good with time.
Okay, great. So then we'll go ahead and move forward with a 5-minute bio break. We'll come back right at the 45-minute mark, and then we'll keep going. This is where I'm going to dive into the strategies. So productivity, time management, all those sustainable productivity strategies, you don't want to miss it. So don't leave, come back. I'll see y'all in 5 minutes. All right, we are back. I get thumbs up from Sam. I'm happy to keep going. Yay. All right, so now we're going to dive into some sustainable productivity strategies. This is the fun part. I shared all these concepts, and you're probably thinking, now what? How do I actually do something about it when it comes to me getting my work done? So, first, I'm going to talk about time and energy management. When I think about time management, I think about you feeling empowered to make choices about how you spend your time in a way that is aligned with your values, priorities, and goals. I also can't not think about time without also thinking about energy. And so, energy management is about listening to your mind, body, and spirit so you can make choices about how you use your energy that support your overall well being. Here's one strategy. So, when it comes to the time management piece, I have a couple things to say. One of the really common methods of time management that I hear people talk about is time blocking. That's when you're defining a certain set of similar tasks for a certain period of time. So, literally blocking out your calendar for predetermined shared types of tasks. That can work for some people. But I have also noticed, and this includes myself, that for some folks, you can time block all you want, and yet you might still not quite get those things done that are on your time blocks. And so I want to introduce you to two other concepts that could be helpful to you to apply to your schedule right now. One of them is assigning themes to your day. AKA, you can say, Mondays are my planning days, Tuesdays are my teaching days, Wednesdays are my research and writing days. What does that mean? That no matter what happens that day, you will at least touch that theme. It doesn't mean you're going to do 4 to 6 hours. It doesn't mean, that you're going to guilt yourself for not doing all the tasks related to that thing. It means you're at least going to touch it. Another option, and this has worked well actually for me, is implementing focus versus buffer days. So having days in your calendar that are for high focus tasks. These are the days that you have more empty space on your calendar. You don't want to have multiple days where it's just all kinds of meetings scattered throughout, because then you're left with little breathing room and little time for high focused activities. And so those are the focus days. And there's also buffer days. And buffer days are the days that you've got back to back meetings, maybe, or back to back events, commitments, and you're doing the light work, administrative work, things that don't quite take up a lot of mental space, don't require a lot of focus. Those can be your buffer days. And I borrow this from, it's an entrepreneurial time system, but I actually really appreciate it. I also, for mine, I have added a flex day. So I've got Mondays and Thursdays are my focus days. Tuesdays, Wednesdays are my buffer days, and Fridays are my flexible days. It could be a focus day, it could be a buffer day, or it could be a free day, a day where I'm like, what do I need? Do I need to rest? Do I need to prioritize this project? Do I need to work on a bunch of little things? So you can do with it what you will, but I hope that you figure out a way to look at your schedule that works for you. In fact, there was one thing I mentioned to someone recently that completely shifted their approach to their schedule. I said, one, why not consider viewing your schedule as a template? The way you have a template where it's predetermined, but you don't use it exactly to a T, you still modify it each week, viewing your schedule as a template. And I also reminded this person, why not include joy in your schedule? Actually, schedule out things you look forward to, even if it's a small thing, every day. So that way, every day when you look at your calendar, you're not looking at it with dread. And instead, you have something that you're looking forward to. Now, for my folks who have fluctuating energy levels, which is probably all of us, but especially shout out to my spoony folks in the audience, is if you are someone who has fluctuating energy levels, you might want to test out this approach that I call the ABC method, which is planning your time around your energy levels. So A time is your time that you're the most energetic. B time is when you start to run out of steam. C time is when you're the least energetic. And then pairing your tasks that require the most effort with your A time, your tasks that require less effort. So let's say A time is dissertation work. B time could be teaching work. It requires less effort, not as much as dissertating. And then C time is the light work. Maybe that's grading, maybe that's checking emails, stuff that doesn't take a lot of mental space for you. And really pairing it with thinking about, well, am I a morning person? Am I an afternoon person? Am I a night person? And not forcing yourself to work in one way just because everybody's telling you you've got to write first thing in the morning at 5 a.m. and work out and do all these other things that for me, as someone who is highly symptomatic in the mornings, it doesn't work for me. So I hope you figure out too that you can find a way to work that's tuned in to your body and your needs. Another thing I want to mention, and this I was reminded by someone who I interviewed on my podcast, the Grad School Femtoring podcast. I interviewed someone who worked full time while completing her PhD. And I remember asking her, the topic was on how do you juggle a PhD with a full time job? And the main point I got from her conversation was you have to know what your non negotiables are. And for her, it was prayer and exercise. So no matter what, she never let anybody or anything get in the way of her prayer practice and her exercise routine. And I found that so interesting because I thought to myself, what are my non negotiables? And again, another question you can ask yourself is, what are my core values? What are the things that I refuse to compromise on? And what will I protect my time and energy for? This could be if you're a parent, it could be your babies. This could be if you are a sibling, time with, someone that is your loved one. Whatever it is that restores you, that's important to you. It could even be service work. In my case, I never stopped doing service work in grad school because I knew that it nourished me. Even though everybody around me, a lot of the professors in my department were telling me it was a waste of my time and they were telling me that it was a distraction, I didn't listen to them because I knew how meaningful it was to me. So, just a question for you to think about as you're thinking about non negotiables and how to actually implement it is every time you're faced with a new opportunity, ask yourself, if I say yes, what am I also saying no to? And if I say yes, will this help or prevent me from maintaining my non-negotiables? I recently had to say no to a friend, which was really hard because I don't like disappointing people, who presented me with an opportunity, and it was a paid opportunity at that. But when I thought about the actual work that I was being asked to do, it did not align with my non-negotiables and my long-term goals. So I had to say no to this person. It was hard, it was uncomfortable, but it was me, again, protecting my non-negotiables. Now I want to talk about project management. This is another topic that comes up a lot, which is how do you even plan? How do you organize? How do you manage a project, especially when it comes to grad school? You've got this big looming project, the dissertation that's in the back of your head at all times. And we're going to talk a little bit about work systems and things that might be helpful for you as you navigate this. So one strategy that I'm a big fan of, please hear me out because I can already predict some folks who are like, wait, I already have a lot to do. Why are you telling me to do extra things? Is creating your own SOPs. What's an SOP? A standard operating procedure or a set of instructions that lays out the step-by-step process that you complete something. Examples of these are a checklist for writing a paper. So I've actually encouraged some folks that I work with to, as they're writing their first dissertation chapter, to document what they're doing, especially if they have a case study dissertation. Document the process so that way when they get to chapter 2, they can remember, oh, this is what I did and this is what I did next and this is what comes after that. So they don't have to feel like they're starting all over the second time. You can also have SOPs just to break up the step-by-step process of doing a big project, which can feel big and scary, overwhelming, or even instructions for keeping your email inbox tidy. I'll give an example of one thing that helped me when I was a grad student related to SOPs. I remember one time I was a TA for a class of 160 students. There were 2 TAs. They had weekly 2-page papers. That's 160 students. 80. Wait, is that? Yeah. I'm trying to do mental math. That was 82-page papers every week that I was grading. And so guess what? I created a little rubric and I created a little document with instructions of I'm only spending 10 minutes per paper. If there are common issues, I'm creating a comment that I'm just copy pasting in all the papers. So I created this little manual that would help me as I was grading each paper. So I wasn't spending all this time grading an endless number of essays or short papers. Okay, so now I want to mention this idea of using templates. I mentioned earlier that it can be helpful to think about your schedule as a template. And here I am actually talking about using templates. I'm a big fan of simplifying your life. Don't start from scratch. Use predefined documents if you can. So, where can you use email templates? When you're emailing folks, when you're working on your CV, even as you plan your week, as you note take. On my Google Drive, I use the documents on Google Drive, and every time I have meetings with folks, I will use the same template for the ways that I document the information that I get. So that way I make sure that I consistently keep track of the same information. I've also supported folks with creating a reading strategy template for themselves as they're working for qualifying exams to ask themselves, what are the key questions, most important questions I need to answer about this reading that's going to help me to make progress on my exams? And they answer that for every single reading. And even graphic organizers. I know a lot of us maybe were exposed to graphic organizers when learning how to write an essay in K through 12, but they are actually great even as adults to have a visual way to represent what you're trying to say when you're writing. All right, I mentioned a couple. And before I transition to talking about self-care and community care strategies, I want to hear from you. Which of these resonated? Is there anything that you are willing to test out? And feel free to share. I see themed days. Theme days as well? Ah, strict non-negotiables. Oh, the theme days resonated. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it can help because then no matter what happens, you have that theme in the back of your head and you know that you can at least do something related to that on that day and you never stop touching it. Because that's the thing, sometimes you might not prioritize something, and if it's not on your calendar, it could be weeks before you touch it again. Time blocking, great. Thank you for sharing theme days and non-negotiables. Okay. I know I'm a little bit over time, but it's not the care strategies I'm going to share is not going to take up too much time. But I want to mention first that there are many different types of care. There is environmental care, relational care, spiritual care, recreational care, financial care, emotional care, mental care, physical and professional care. You see, there's so many different layers and facets to, and this is care. This includes for yourself and for your community. And today I'm going to share with you a couple of examples of micro and macro care that could be helpful to you. What do I mean by micro and macro? So macro care is usually the forms of care that we think about that include the highly commercialized forms of care. So these are the things that are time intensive. Maybe you can only allot time once a month or maybe once a quarter, or maybe once a year. A lot of times it's the lofty and accessible things. Like for me, one of the things that would really help me out would be a vacation. But right now, I got to prioritize my finances. So that's going to be put on hold, this lofty type of care for me because currently it's financially inaccessible. That doesn't mean it's always going to be financially inaccessible. It's just right now. So even if macro forms of care are inaccessible to you right now, there's always something that you can do to take care of yourself. That's why I believe in also implementing micro care. And a combination of both would be great. But if all else fails and you really feel like you don't have access to time, energy, money, etc., test out the micro forms of care. These are things that take less than 10 minutes to do. You can do them daily. They're feasible, they're flexible. A lot of times they're free. They're often not given the acknowledgement that they need. And in any case, whenever you're taking care of yourself, you do have to be intentional about it. You do have to decide, how often am I going to do this? It does require you prioritizing it. And like I said, they're both valuable. I don't want to discount one over the other because ideally you want to have a combination of different types of micro, macro, self, and community care. Here are some examples of macro self care: tending to your medical and dental appointments, doing those things that maybe are uncomfortable, but it's just making sure that you're okay. Going to therapy, engaging in spiritual practices that are meaningful to you, calling a loved one, updating a budget, setting a firm boundary around a toxic or harmful individual. That is a form of self care. Here are a couple more: taking a nap that usually takes longer than 10 minutes, taking a social media break, taking a sick day or a mental health day. Please, please take mental health days. Engaging in a creative practice of your choice, spending time in nature, and attending a group event. And here are some macro forms of community care: mentoring others, providing one another with mutual aid, offering to babysit, participating in volunteer work or fundraising, activism, voting, that's coming up for us, sustain acts of compassion, kindness. And now I'm going to mention some of the micro forms of care. So, micro forms of self care is scheduling in buffer time in between meetings. Again, this is a big one. Sometimes we've got back to back stuff. So, you want to be compassionate with yourself, give yourself some breathing room. Make those meetings 45 minutes, 50 minutes. If you can't do that, give yourself a break in between. Smell a scented candle, a scented lotion, if you like that. I'm sensitive to scents, so it doesn't always work for me, but I know some folks who really enjoy it. Text a friend to let them know you're thinking of them. Slowly sip and actually enjoy your favorite beverage, not just like morning coffee, super quick, go to the next thing. Enjoy the things that you're having that are nourishing you. Do some reflective journaling for 5 minutes. I don't journal every day, but when I do, I know that I don't have to do it for a long period of time. 5 minutes is enough. And here's one that personally have. I have a brag bank. Yes, I call it a brag bank. It's okay to brag a little. And I put nice comments or messages that I've received, personal messages. A lot of these messages, I don't share them publicly unless I have permission to do so. But even then, most of the time, I don't feel comfortable asking to share them. So I just keep them in a folder. And when I feel bad, when the negativity biases come up, or I'm just having a rough week, I'll go back to it to remind myself, like, I'm not feeling great today, and that's okay. And also, I'm doing okay. I am appreciated. I am loved. I am affirmed. Now, other forms of microforms of self-care are a short guided meditation, listening to a meditation or doing some sort of short meditation if that works for you. Creating a gratitude practice, so writing down 3 things that you're grateful for. I started doing this in grad school. I had a shared doc with one of my besties, and each day we would go in and name 3 things that we were grateful for. And we had to do it because we were doing it for each other. And it was super nice to see what she would write, because then that would remind me, oh, right, I have that too. I can be grateful for that. Sharing a funny meme with someone, that's always nice to do, just to know I'm thinking of you. Cuddling a pet, doing some deep breathing, stretching, eating, drinking anything that feels nourishing or comforting to you without any guilt or shame. Now, community care, micro forms. It doesn't take long. Giving a micro affirmation. This is the opposite of a microaggression. That's when you tell someone, I see you, I validate you, I affirm you, you're doing a great job. Sharing a resource with someone. I love this one. I love sharing resources. So share, something comes up. I thought of you. Here's this resource. Text a friend when you think about them. I am someone that I feel like I bug people, but I remind myself I'm not bugging them. It's okay for me to text them when I think about them. Small acts of kindness can go a long way that can make or break someone's day. Connecting with others and mindful acts of active listening. Actually, taking a step away from all the things you're thinking about, and when someone is talking to you, actively listening to them. All right, so I know we're over time, but I want to encourage you to think about one self care strategy. You all named at least one, and then one community care strategy. It can be micro or macro, doesn't matter, whatever is accessible to you. And then, yeah, one self care, one community care, and one productivity strategy. So let me correct myself. You have one productivity strategy that you named, but please think about how you're going to care for yourself and others as well. And if you want to, you're welcome to share in the chat your self care, community care, and productivity strategy. All right. So the last thing I want to say is that it's really, really important as you're doing this work as a grad student for you to start to really tune into who you are, really get to know yourself, listen to your mind, body, and spirit. Also, I hope that with the concepts that I introduced to you today, some of them you might have heard about, some of them you might not, that you can use them to help you reframe challenges and be more compassionate with yourself. I also want you to be more curious in finding strategies that work for you. I only shared a few. I have so many. I could have spent hours sharing strategies, but I don't have hours with you. So do the work. Even if something I shared didn't resonate with you, figure out what will, because trust me, there are things that will resonate for you or that are going to work for you. And then once again, make sure you incorporate micro and macro forms of self and community care. You can't do one without the other, and come up with your own definition of productivity, your own definition of care that includes your terms, that's inclusive of your identities, of your values, your needs. I shared with you my definition. You can take it with you and run with it if you want. But if not, create your own. You get to redefine productivity. You get to redefine care. You also get to redefine success. Okay, I'm going to ask you for a minute of your time. I have this very, very brief survey. I'm serious. It doesn't take longer than 2 minutes. If you go to talk.ac/grad school femtoring or go to this QR code, very briefly fill out my survey to share feedback. I really value feedback. I take it seriously. I use it to improve my services. And the bonus is that you get instant access to today's slides. If you like them, if you want them, please feel free to briefly share feedback. And then after this, we'll transition to the Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Yvette. I have learned so much. I love your concept of microcare and your brand bank idea. I will definitely be taking that with me. Okay, everyone, as we transition to Q&A and you gather your thoughts and your questions, my colleague is going to place our evaluation survey in the chat. Can you please do me a favor and just open the link now? Um, this is so that you'll have the tab just ready and open and waiting for you when we're done. Okay, thank you for doing that. And I also want to ask you again to please change your name to the name that you registered with so that we know that you're here. Thank you for that as well. I also want to share that we would love to take a group photo at the end of this. If you could stick around at the end, maybe pop your cameras on so we can see your beautiful faces. We'd love to have you for that as well. Okay, so what questions do you have for Dr. Yvette? You can type them in the chat or you can raise your hand through Zoom. You can take yourself off mute.
I also welcome comments or reactions.
As everyone is gathering their thoughts and ideas, Dr. That I have a question. So, non-negotiables. Love the concept of them. I have many, right? How do you protect them? Because that is where I find myself. I like in theory, they're non-negotiables, and yet I always find myself sort of letting them slide.
When I first started implementing non negotiables, I found myself letting them slide a lot. And then I found myself feeling a little bit resentful. And so anytime I find myself feeling that feeling of resent, I will go back and write it down. Like, what is it about this situation? It's nothing against the person or anything like that. It's my feelings. What is it about the situation that has me feeling this way? And how can I turn that into some sort of internal policy to help me avoid or minimize that feeling of resentment in the future? So for me, that means that, if I am feeling frustrated that someone keeps showing up late to a meeting and I'm like, no, I want to make sure that they're not showing up late. It's making sure I let them know, just a heads up. I'll wait up to 10 minutes or 15 minutes. After that, I'm going to be canceling the call. So, doing things like that, just having internal policies, you can call them, or internal rules or internal commandments, whatever you want to use as the language that works for you. I just call them rules of, how many times I'm willing to check my email, what time of day I'm willing to work until, and at what point it's my cutoff time. And reminding myself that it's for my survival. Some things I I just know because it has harmed me enough times that every time something comes up where they're pushing against a boundary, I'm like, "Oh, no, no. I'm not gonna say yes to this because I know it's gonna be harmful to me." So, again, in the beginning, you might need ways to remind yourself. Maybe you need to write them down, have them in a little Post-it, have them on your wallpaper on your phone, something, a visual reminder of your non negotiables if you're not remembering them, or tune into your body. What is it that you're feeling? Why is it that you're feeling that way? What can you do in the future? And then remembering when you feel that feeling again, oh, wait, I've been here before. What did I do last time? Oh, right, I wrote about it here. Let me see what I can do to change it this time. It's a lot of learning from it. It's a iterative process, I would say.
Thank you. Yes, that really seems to sort of sit with this just having to know yourself and really getting to know yourself and then like allowing this process to be an opportunity to get to know yourself and writing to process, to learn. See, I think is a great idea, a great suggestion for that, rather than maybe beating myself up after the fact and then repeating the same mistake.
I love this idea, though, that you mentioned about writing to process because it can be really helpful. I know some folks who dread working on their dissertation. And I'm sorry, one of those things that come up, one of the helpful things that they have tried is giving themselves permission to write about their feelings before they start working on their dissertation. And sometimes in writing it out, in fact, I'm thinking about this book, The Artist's Way. In this book, the author shares with folks and encourages them to work on morning pages, which is like 2 pages of free writing, just regurgitating whatever you're thinking. And a lot of times, just the act of getting it out from your mind to a page is helpful, helps you to process, and it helps you to gain clarity on what's going on.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. Someone asked Dr. Yvette, how do you deal with implicit racism in the workplace? Do you have any suggestions?
How do I deal with implicit racism?
Yes. Do you have any sort of with your myriad strategies that you can offer us? Like, what are your reflections on it? What can we do?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to share with you what I do. And I also want to call attention to a podcast episode that I have where I interviewed a guest who she facilitates anti bias and microaggressions workshops. And I remember in that episode, she shared a lot of strategies on how to deal with implicit racism and implicit bias, even better than the ones that I can share. So I will put that in the chat, but I will say this, one of the things that I wanna acknowledge is, one, as a light-skinned Latina, I cannot say that I experience the same levels of racism that folks who are darker skinned or folks who are Black. I'm a non-Black person of color, so I have to acknowledge that privilege. But that's not to say that I haven't experienced racism. I have, and I've experienced racism and sexism combined. And for me, what was really challenging at first was that at one point I felt like I had to fight all the battles, and it was deeply impacting me physically, mentally, and my spirit. It felt like what some scholars call spirit murder. And so for me, it was really important to figure out which are the battles I'm willing to fight and which are the things I'm going to let go of because I can't fight every battle. So that was one thing. Another thing too is finding supports, finding community, finding allies, comrades, co-conspirators. Because again, depending on, I don't know the level of racism that you're experiencing, but it can impact you to the point of negatively impacting your health. And I don't want the worst to happen to you because of this. And so that's why I say make sure that document these experiences if you need to, protect yourself, have your board of supports, folks that you can go to that are trusted people who have your back because I don't take issues of racism lightly. I'm someone who's highly sensitive, so something that might seem small to someone deeply impacts me. And so I start to notice when things come up way before they become really bad. And so I just don't want things to compound and get worse for you, whoever is the individual that's dealing with this. I know sometimes getting out of these spaces is outside of your control. And so because of that, you have to arm yourself and you've got to arm yourself also with those boundaries and those non negotiables. If you've got to limit your interaction with these folks, then do that, but figure out what it is that you can do again to protect yourself and know that you cannot fight all of the battles, especially not on your own. I hope that answered your question. And let me get that episode, by the way, since I mentioned it. All right. I'm just going to share here in the chat with everyone. There's a link on how to identify and respond to microaggressions and unconscious biases. It's a really good episode. There's a lot more strategies than what I shared today.
Thank you. So, Tori, and I have another question. So, at the very beginning, I loved when you mentioned how we have many facets of our lives, and that so the idea of work-life balance typically makes it seem very binary and sort of allows the work aspect to sort of supersede the life aspect of the dynamic because there's only two. Can you speak more to this idea that work is just one aspect of the numerous facets of our life and sort of how to see it in a more holistic way?
Yes. What your question reminds me of is I actually created this life assessment. If you Google life assessments, there's a bunch of free assessments, and all the ones that I found online were not catered to someone like me. I didn't feel like they were inclusive, but I created my own to help me and others assess what are the areas of my life that are important to me. So that can include recreation, that can include finances, that can include spirituality, that can include culture, that can include your career, that can include your relationships, that can include family. So, see, these are all different areas. I wanted a way for me to assess how am I doing in these areas? Are there areas that I'm not giving myself credit for? I'm actually doing better than I thought. Are there areas that I'm scoring low and that's just because of the season that I'm in and I've accepted that I'm not going to tend to that area right now? Or is it low and I intentionally want to increase that? One thing that came up for me when I took this assessment, and you all can find your own, or I can share the link to the assessment if y'all want, but was I realized that for me, spirituality had been really low. And I wanted to be more intentional about developing some sort of spiritual practice so that it wouldn't be as low because that was an area I wanted to prioritize. And so since being intentional about it, developing more of a spiritual practice that score has since increased. I'm not telling you you have to take an assessment to figure this out, but I am saying that I want you to pay attention to the areas of your life that are important to you. And I hope that you can carve out time for them. Even if it means maybe temporarily, you might put that area on pause or maybe not spend as much time because I know I get it. When I was a grad student, there were a lot of things that I physically did not have enough time to tend to. And so for you, it's just figure out what are the most important ones for me right now that I intentionally want to make time for. And then when you look at your schedule, maybe you can start to add them within your schedule. Because ideally, you want a schedule that reflects all of you, not just the academic you or the work related version of you.
That's awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, for those who are still here with us, thank you for attending today. We so appreciate your presence and your participation with us today. And Dr. Yvette, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. The recording and the slides for everyone in the audience will be sent out once it has been processed. Or, like Dr. Yvette said, that if you go to her QR code or her website and you give her some feedback, I think the slides are available immediately. So that's pretty cool. Never heard of that before. But also remember, please also, when you get a chance, hop over to our survey so that we can continue to improve our programming for you. Thank you. Take care of yourselves.